Hello, I'm Professor Lieu. Welcome to our live stream. I'm here today with art prof teaching artist Jordan McCracken-Foster, and we are critiquing your artwork today. We've got two pieces. We have this portrait painting by Naomi B, and we also have a photograph by Brenda Fernandez that we're going to be talking about. If you would like to grow as an artist and you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof, critiques and tutorials. Let's get started looking at Naomi's piece. So what I'm going to do right now is go down to the video description below, and you guys can do that as well. And we're going to read a little bit about Naomi's piece. She talks about how she's a British Indian recent grad based in Brooklyn, studied engineering in college, but she's been making art on her own since she can remember. And she talks about how she's the first generation of her family to be brought up in the UK, interested in exploring intergenerational friction within Indian immigrant families. And so this is a portrait of Naomi's mother, talking about the tension between Indian tradition and modern Western living. And her mother was the first to emigrate from India. She had to face the challenge starting anew, fitting it into an alien culture, and she wanted to juxtapose parts of her mother's upbringing with aspects of her current life as someone who's comfortably settled in Britain. And she said the main example is a contrast between her mother's dress with, I'm going to mispronounce this, Nakshi Kantha, a Bengali traditional craft, and her sunglasses, print socks. The aim was to show the possibility and importance, finding a happy medium, holding onto certain traditions while also being open-minded to new ways of living life, as her mother has had to do. Jordan, what's your first impression of Naomi's portrait?
I think my favorite thing is just how warm the figure is compared to the background behind her. Everything in the background feels kind of stale and blue, and it feels very much like a different world just by the use of color. But with the mom portraits, the mom, there's something that's very vibrant. There's something that's very warm and inviting about it, and I think just understanding that mood and that feeling is really what's coming across for me at the beginning.
Yeah, that contrast between the figure and the background is so stark. I don't know about you, but I feel like the kitchen is almost moody and sterile looking by comparison. And I'm just wondering why that is. If maybe it's a commentary on how the Western life felt by comparison. I don't know. Why do you think the kitchen looks like that?
Um, I don't know. It could be a commentary. It could just be a lack of detail. Because when you think about a kitchen, there's like a knife set or a cutting board or just things around it to make it feel lived in. And the only thing that bothers me right now about it is that it just feels like they just moved into the house and they just and the chair is like the only thing they have to sit on because everything else is still being moved up. So it doesn't really feel like it's a lived-in kitchen, but it does feel different than the mother for sure.
Well, the other thing that's interesting as well is that the way the mother is seated, she looks quite formal, actually. Like, she doesn't look like she's comfortable in her home. I mean, I feel like a lot of people, when they're at home, it's like you sort of let yourself go, kick up your feet,
Yeah.
eat Skittles all night and watch Sherlock, which is what I did last night. And she just seems so stiff and upright. And even the way that her hand positions are, I wonder if that's somewhat a commentary about the discomfort of being in a different culture and that culture feeling very stale by comparison. Because, I mean, like, Jordan, how would you describe the style of the way the mother is painted?
Uh, there's something very lively about it. I feel and I understand the muscles and the blood coming through the cheeks, and there's just something about it that makes her feel like she's an actual living human being. And I know that sometimes it's very hard to accomplish, but again, with the background, and again, I think this is part of the point of the piece. It feels so different. Like it feels like I'm in a doctor's office that that no one visits. It's just got that. I don't want to say creepy, but it definitely feels like a place I would uh, would not feel comfortable in.
We've got some comments in the chat. I thought says she represented the Bengali theme, Nokshi Katha, really well. It's beautiful. And MC Love says, love the socks. What a beautiful mixture of things. Yeah, someone here is actually saying, Naomi, were the socks inspired by Lauren Welch? Yeah, we did a stream the other day about how to create a series of artworks, and Lauren had these sock paintings that she's been doing on and off for the past few years, so I can definitely see the relationship there. So we're talking a little bit about that contrast between the dress and the socks. Do you feel like that contrast is coming across, or is it more figure to background?
Um, I feel like it's more figure to background personally, just because the colors between the dress and the socks are pretty similar when you zoom out, and they have this very fun expression. What was it? Ex- there's a word I'm looking for. I can't think of it right now. There's a lot of expression to it. I'll just put it like that. And there's something about that just feels like there is some sort of culture being brought into it, and it feels like there's a story even being told in the attire. So I really appreciate that.
Well, I think one color distinction that's pretty clear is that the background is all cool colors. I mean, there's not a single warm color in that kitchen and wall. I mean, yeah, the floor is a warm color, but I almost feel like, well, so in my experience, okay, I'm first generation Taiwanese American, and I definitely grew up with that cultural friction that Naomi is talking about. And one thing that I definitely noticed is that my friends used to always tell me, my American friends, they would be like, your family is so loud. And I'm like, yeah, that's just the way we are. But I feel like a lot of American families are not like that. They're more quiet and a little bit more reserved. Like, Jordan, you ever see that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
Yes, yes.
So, you know, in that movie, how she's got this huge Greek family and they're like super loud and they have these giant parties. And then she hangs out with her husband's family and they're like sitting in silence in their like super neat, sterile home. That's what it makes me think about. And so, what I think is unusual here is that Naomi only has one person in the scene, and yet she is showing that tension. I think there definitely is a tension that comes across in the scene for sure. Now, what about the chair? The chair is pretty important because it's a very particular design, and the way she's seated in it is strange because there's no table, there's no other chairs. It's this lone chair that's sitting in the middle of this space. What do you think the chair says about the environment?
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of go back to what I was saying before. It feels kind of like they just moved into the place and that's like the only furniture they have. But I get the sense that the chair is probably one of the only other connections that they have to the culture because this figure, she's only interacting with that chair. And if you want to include the floor, because that's where that's where her weight is going. But everything else, there's no real connection. There's no sense of attachment there. And so I think that I don't know what type of chair that is, but I imagine it's something that is reminiscent or supposed to represent something from the culture that her mother is represents as a part of.
We've got some great interpretations that people are talking about in the chat. Damara says, I don't know if it's intentional. I like there isn't a shadow on the ground below the chair, kind of otherworldly and maybe symbolic of the circumstance of your mother in a foreign country. And Corinne is saying she doesn't seem grounded. Even the chair doesn't seem to really firmly stand on the floor yet. And Damara also says like she's floating in this in-between space. Those are some really good points because you know what's interesting, Jordan, is if you look at the face and the anatomy, those are pretty accurate as far as reality goes. I mean, there's no mega distortion. Like, we were just looking at this detail of the knee. The anatomy is really well done. And yet it seems like there's a really deliberate choice to not include the cast shadows of the chair. and to not have the lighting makes sense. So, does that work for you? Her leaving out really visible parts of the scene that we expect to be there?
I think so. I think it helps communicate the idea of the two distinct realities, if you will. You got the one where the figure's totally separate in her own world, and sort of like a fish out of water. And I feel like that's really what's kind of going on. And actually, there is this part on the ground right underneath her knees that are colored slightly differently than the rest of the floor. And I kind of interpreted that as the shadow, but it's not really that noticeable. It's more like a different hue. It's like slightly more orange. I don't know if you see what I'm saying, but I think that things like that are actually really cool.
Well, it's really subtle. I mean, you almost can miss it if you're not looking really carefully. But there is something sort of ghost like about this, as people are saying. Excuse me. Luis is saying, I'm Puerto Rican. Everyone says we're so loud. Karen is saying, my mom lived through a similar thing. She's Romanian and she seems loud to Germans. It can be rough to have that experience. She said she sometimes felt like people look at her like she's an insect. Alice is saying, I have the opposite impression. Americans are super loud, everything they do, from talking or opening or closing a door or even placing a plate on the table. Yikes, it was unnerving. Isn't it so interesting, depending on where you're from and what you're used to, the contrasts are so different depending on what's going on in your own reaction. Skullgirl says, I feel like with cool colors, the background has a sanitized feel. The color in life is only in the figure who is not a part of the entire scene. Yeah, I love the patterning on the shirt. I mean, we're looking at a close up right now, and I really feel like there's a whole story in there. I mean, how do you interpret that design, Jordan?
I mean, it feels like one of those things you get at a very unique store, like not like a chain, but like a mom and pop kind of clothing store where they sew, knitted or sewed it by hand or something like that. And it feels very special and unique. And I really like that. She could have easily done something like put her in a t-shirt or something really simple, but there's so much care taken into this painting, even down to the way it folds across the different planes of the body. And it feels like when it's on her chest, it feels like it's on that plane. When it's on her leg, it feels like it's dipping and curving in. I love that kind of detail.
Well, I think what comes across for me in terms of the shirt is just really specific. Like, if you guys look at that tree that's right underneath her neck, look at how specific the shape of the leaves are. Because I feel like a lot of the time, people don't take the time to be specific. They just say, oh, a tree. And then you end up with these really generic looking leaves that you see everybody doing all over the place. But I just love that even though I may not know exactly which culture that pattern comes from, it really feels specific and personal. And I think that part of the piece is really, really important. Now, what about the facial expression, Jordan? How do you interpret that?
The face, I feel like it's one of those like I'm here now. This is what we gotta do kind of faces. It doesn't like not particularly amused, but also not sorrowful and depressed. It's just kind of like this is the situation we're in, and we have to deal with it. I don't know what that emotion would be called or expression would be called, but that's kind of the feeling I'm getting.
Well, people have different ideas here, which I love reading about, you guys. MC is saying, is the figure supposed to look like she's in mourning? She does to me. And I think oh, okay. Jayida says, to me, her expression seems like as if she is not liking the situation that she is in. And Ruan Mendez says, to me, her face is the painting's center. It's so striking, sad, but almost hopeful. Yeah, I feel that that is the case actually for sometimes people come to another country not because they want to go, but maybe because their spouse wants to go and they sort of get pulled along. I mean, I had a friend in graduate school who really wanted to live in the US and it was his passion to go to art school here, but I knew his wife was not happy about it. And I just remember her just being so disconnected and so numb, but it's like she had to accept it. Like there wasn't anything she could do to bring them back. And so I think it's a really interesting expression because she's staring forward, but she also feels a little bit like she's okay with that. Like it's not this obvious, oh my God, I'm so upset type of expression. So I'm just really impressed by the subtlety of that. I don't really see that very much in facial expressions. I feel like a lot of the times people are so hyperbolic about expressions like, I'm so sad, I'm really mad, and there isn't a lot in between. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, subtlety is definitely hard to master. And, actually, as you were speaking, it kind of reminded me of something that a lot of parents do when they're trying to protect their kids is they kind of hide their emotions or hide certain aspects of what's really going on from them just to protect them and make sure that they're, uh, not seeing mom or dad depressed or anything like that. And that's kind of the feeling that I get here. Like I'm reminded of those times where, something bad was going on and my parents just didn't want to tell me because I was like 7. And why would they tell me that? I don't even know if that would be good parenting at that point. And I almost get the feeling that that she's kind of looking past us and almost behind us in a way too. I feel like there's like those things combined really make for a powerful expression that's almost hard to articulate.
So one artist who I immediately thought about when I saw Naomi's painting is Amy Sherald. I think Amy Sherald's emphasis on patterning, I think, is really important in her work. And she does have a similar modeled look to her figures in terms of the rendering. I mean, I think Sherald's work is a little bit more smooth in a way. Some of you guys have probably saw she was the one that did the presidential portrait of Michelle Obama. So you're probably familiar with that piece. And that's really what put her on the map. But I think that Naomi, if you're watching this, she would be a great person for you to look at in terms of the graphic quality of the figures, the use of the patterning, even the backgrounds, I think remind me a lot of Naomi's pieces. And then another person I think to look at too, who's really different stylistically, but I think also digs deep into personalities, is Alice Neal. And Alice Neal does a lot of weird proportional things with her figures, which Naomi, I don't think that's really what you're after. But I think some of these scenes with some of the props, like the plant going on in the background, even the pattern that's on the bed, these are all really interesting decisions that I think do pour into that story. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a really powerful piece. I think maybe what could be improved, in my opinion, okay, sorry guys, linear perspective police. It's going a little bit crazy in that kitchen. Do you think that matters, Jordan?
Yes, I think linear perspective always matters unless you're obviously trying to go bonkers with it and make it confusing and just destroy the entire location, basically.
Yeah, the wood grain actually doesn't really bother me that much. I mean, technically speaking, you would see linear perspective in that ground, but because it is such a subtle pattern, I read it more as a flat area of shape. But that refrigerator is driving me nuts. It's like it's just like a little bit tilted. And so what you would need for the linear perspective to be correct back there is you would need all the verticals to be parallel. That's the one thing because everything else, the contrast is gorgeous. I think the hair being so dark against that bright frosty blue, there's so many beautiful decisions, but it's like the background to me just falls apart, not just in terms of linear perspective, but I also feel like the actual painting technique is not as good back there. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's one of the things that made me drawn even more to the face because I understand things are in the background, less detail, and maybe a little bit more impressionistic back there, but the contrast is so high. It almost feels like a collaged painting in a way, where it's like the mother was painted completely separately on a different canvas, and the background was painted on what, and then they were able to just kind of plop it onto the other. And I think that does allow me to step back a little bit and go, huh, I'm not really sure how this connects.
Yeah, I think that it's so close. It's really, really difficult. Yeah, a couple of people are saying, Lisa says, phew, I'm not the only one who wanted the refrigerator to be vertical. And Slepnir says, oh, I missed this comment. She's very stoic. And Corinne says, the cruelest sorrow is the one you are trying to hide. There's so many complicated emotions in this piece. And I do feel, Jordan, we keep talking about the emotion and story in this piece for a long time. And that to me is the sign of a really rich image. It's beautifully painted. You just got to fix your linear perspective because we're coming after you, the linear perspective police.
Yep.
If you guys would like to be considered for a critique here on YouTube, just go to ourprof.org and click on critiques. We have a submission form there, and we'll take a look at what you guys are making. Okay, let's talk about the next piece, which is by Brenda Fernandez. So I'm going to go down to the video description and tell you guys a little bit about her work. Brenda is 23 years old, Mexican artist, in her last semester getting her degree in photography. She was born and raised in a Catholic, really conservative household. Everything was censored and taboo. Art, but especially photography, was a way for her to escape, figure out who she actually wanted to be. And the title of this piece is called This is the Feeling You Thought You'd Repressed. Haha, rhymes with itch, because I don't want to get demonetized. I'm back, where I talk about struggles of mental illness, being silenced by society and her family through a series of morphed and depressive self-portraits. It's a world where you have to speak, think, and act a certain way to be accepted. And this is how Brenda's fighting back against prejudice with her repressed past. It's also the untold story of many years of taking ADHD medication every day, how it altered her mind, forced her into becoming somebody she wasn't, in the awakening after realizing you didn't need them after all. Wow, that is so much in this piece, and I'm so excited to talk about this. What do you think, Jordan? What's your first reaction?
I have a soft spot for pieces that have to do with some sort of duality. And when they're saying that, one side I had to do this or I experienced this, but on the inside, or on the other half, I was feeling this way. And I feel like it's one of those things that's been done so many times, but everyone has a very fresh way of commenting on that. And so I think this is really, really successful in that sense, where I get to see that duality of what's going on the outside, what's going on the inside, by the choice of lighting, how powerful that is, how the figure's face is just literally half it is in black. And you have to use your imagination to figure out where the rest of the pieces are. I really like things like that.
By the way, Naomi B is in the chat and she's saying, thank you so much for all the thoughtful critiques. It definitely need to work on linear perspective. Well, I'm so glad you could watch the critique live, Naomi. We love it when the artist is live. And by the way, Brenda Fernandez, whose photograph we're looking at, she's in the chat. So this is great, Brenda. Maybe if we have questions or anything you want to tell us about the piece, it's so nice because then it feels like more of a conversation in terms of the critique. Yeah, I think, Jordan, you're onto something because it is not a new idea, this duality of having to be a certain way when you're really something else. But I think it's something a lot of us can relate to, whether it's about mental illness or cultural differences. I think that everybody has their own version of that. And I think that definitely is something we can feel and sympathize with. I mean, I don't know about you guys in the chat, but I feel that it's such a striking image. Like, it's so haunting and it just like slaps you in the face in a good way. It's really strange. And I'm just taking some time to try to absorb it. I mean, Jordan, do you read this as a specific person, like one person, or do you feel like it's a crowd of people?
It feels like one person to me. It feels like an individual's thoughts, or they have like the old school idea of like the angel and devil on shoulder, and like just like the inner thoughts somehow being communicated. That's kind of what it feels like to me. It almost kind of reminds me of like an 80s music video, where like there's just, it's very mysterious and you have this one singer in the middle just doing their thing. That's kind of what I'm thinking of here.
Well, I don't know if any of you guys have seen that performance called Blue Man Group. That's exactly what I thought of. Have you seen Blue Man Group before or heard of it, Jordan?
I've heard of them. I've never actually seen them perform.
Well, if you guys have not heard of Blue Man Group, I mean, it's literally a group of blue men, but it's this theater performance. But from what I've seen of it, it does read more like performance art. And they make all these noises, they have these pipes, and they splatter paint. And actually, this slide here of them swimming in this weird pink slime reminded me a lot of your piece, Brenda, because of the way that they're emerging out of this space. So you might look up Blue Man Group. I mean, it's a really different subject. It's a lot more playful, a lot more whimsical than what you're doing. But I just sort of feel like the repeated face that is this strange, scary looking bluish color, it just immediately made me think about that. So that would be a really cool relationship, I think, to explore. Now, Jordan, what about the arrangement of the figures? Because if you go back and you look at the whole thing, they're pretty evenly spread out. Do you like that, or do you think the location of the faces could be better?
I think the location, the scale can be improved. I personally would like to see the heads at slightly different sizes, like and have there be like a focal point or one head that almost represents them all. It doesn't have to be that much bigger, but I think we should definitely be drawn to it for one. The other thing is I feel like I could actually split this piece right down the middle because the way these heads are separated. You have the first set on the left that's almost doing this diagonal, these diagonal rows, and then you have the one on the right, which is basically making a zero shape. And I feel like I could easily just take scissors, cut them through the middle, and just make them two separate posters. And those two individually could work on their own, but together, I feel like it's a little too convenient the way they're set up, if that makes sense.
Brenda, I'm curious, did you take individual photos and then arrange them in Photoshop? Like, what was your actual process for putting the image together? I'm just really curious about that because, Jordan, I would agree. I think that you could play more with the composition. And I would just sit around and make like 20 compositions and just try different things. Because one thing that I think would be cool is if some of the figures were a lot darker, so they would feel like they were pushed back into space more. And then maybe some that are a little bit more contrasty, because I do feel like space wise, they're all on the same plane. And it'd be really nice if we could feel that some of them are further away and some of them are a little bit closer. So Brenda is saying, yes, I took several different pictures, rearranged them in Photoshop. Okay, so we can work on the placement a little bit more. What about the color, Jordan? This eerie turquoise blue. Do you like that? Do you like that it's monochromatic?
Yeah, I actually think that that helps make the what's the word? It helps unify the piece, and the color I think works pretty well because it's bright, and there's a certain aspect of it that could be seen as very fun, and it's one of those things where it's all color theory. You place a certain color next to another, and it could be playful and fun. Another one makes it look dark and mysterious. And I think with this particular combination, it's more dark and mysterious. Whereas if it were surrounded by pinks and yellows and pastel colors, it might read off as a background for a Looney Tunes cartoon. So I think this is working really well with this setup and the idea that's trying to be conveyed based on what we read in the artist statement.
We have a lot of interpretations. MC says they seem to represent her demons or something. Slepnir says it's a piece you need to look at and reflect about. And Corinne says, I love the high dramatic contrast, great color. I love the haunting and feeling look. And Luis is saying, reminds me of scattered racing thoughts in one's mind. And Brenda says, the non-eyes represent how I felt sort of blind for so many years while taking the medication. Well, let's talk about the theme because there's a couple things going on. Because Brenda, in your artist statement, you talk about being born and raised Catholic in a conservative household, but then there's also this theme about the ADHD medication. So, Jordan, do you think that those themes come across, one of them or separately or both together?
I don't know if I did not read the artist statement. Uh, I don't know if I would be able to pick out all of those things. I definitely don't think I'd be able to pick out the whole Catholicism aspect. I might be able to pick up the ADHD part as well, but I don't know. It feels more like it's about an overall feeling of kind of sinking into this depression or, uh, having this struggle of, one idea of something versus the other. And I don't know if it's, I don't know if to the audience all those things are necessarily needed to understand the feeling and the mood, because I think you get that sense just by looking at it. But for someone who wants to learn more about what's going on, having that information is definitely helpful.
Yeah, so Brenda, I think a couple things you might consider is trying to emphasize certain faces over others, because there's a couple faces in here that are really dramatic. Like there's this one sticking its tongue out, there's one with its mouth open wide. But there's also, I feel like there's one back here. Yeah, there's this one, it's repeated twice in this image, but it's sort of like tilted down a little bit. So it's almost like it's looking away at us. And so I wonder if you play with point of view and maybe the angle of the face a little bit more dramatically, we can feel that there's a broader range of emotions being depicted. Because I do think you're right, Jordan. I think we don't need to look at this and say, oh, born and raised Catholic. Like, I don't think that's the point of a piece like this. It doesn't feel that it's meant to illustrate things verbatim. It feels like it's more about just feeling this, like you said, the sinking feeling of not belonging. And I feel that that does come across really beautifully. Now, what about the title, Jordan? Because that's a pretty distinctive title. Let me read it again so that way you guys remember. It's called This is the Feeling You Thought You'd Repressed. Haha, rhymes with itch. I'm back. Not, I mean, it's just a word I don't want to say because I don't want to get demonetized. So, Jordan, what do you think about the title? That's a pretty substantial title.
Yeah, it's it reminds me of, it's like one of those books that were written in like the mid 1800s that just had super long titles. Like for example, the book Origin of Species by Charles Darwin isn't actually just that title. It's got like 20 other words in the title. They just cut it for modern day. I feel like this is one of those kinds of situations, and it would be really funny to me going back to the whole duality or like splitting the piece into two. This word diptych. I think it'd be hilarious if it was this is the feeling you thought you had repressed in one part, and then for the second part you have all the really wild expressions, and then have haha blip I'm back. Like that would just I think that'd be hilarious. But um, yeah, it's one of those titles that is very striking, is very amusing, and it definitely has a humorous aspect to it. I don't think I'm supposed to read it and think, and be somber. I think I'm supposed to read it and just go, oh snap! Like this person's pretty like, wow, this person's got a sense of humor. This is pretty funny, you know.
Well, that's why I think the title really has a prominent role here. I mean, I'm so boring with my titles. I'm like, self portrait number one, self portrait number two. I mean, mostly it's out of laziness because I don't want to like bother having to give every single artwork a unique title. But definitely, once you read that title, it does throw you for a loop because there is something really brash and obnoxious and funny about that title. But then the image is so haunting and somber. And so, Brenda, I just wonder, do you want that title to have such a stark contrast against that? Because most titles, I'm like, whatever. But this one really gets you thinking. And the first part of it, I think, does feel like it matches more. But then the haha bleep, I'm back. That is the part of that title that does make you really reevaluate what's going on. And maybe it is that duality that Jordan's talking about. That part of it's funny and humorous, and another part of it is a lot more somber. Big Hen is saying maybe a series of works on the same theme could expand on the necessity of having to deal with having to be multiple versions of ourselves, some chosen personas, some imposed on us. And Amer is saying, I don't see the title as humoristic, to be honest. It just looks like something that a monster from a nightmare would say just before a jump scare. This is great. I mean, Jordan, are you noticing that with both of the pieces we're critiquing today, everybody has their own take on that? Do you think that's a strength or a weakness?
I think it's a strength for these particular pieces because a lot of it does have to do with emotion, and I feel like there's some paintings that are or images that are very heavily story driven, and there's almost only one or two ways you can read it. But with this, where it's supposed to be dealing with something that's internal and dealing with emotion and how someone's feeling, I think having multiple interpretations is really awesome because you have all these different people coming from different perspectives and they have their own interpretations. And I think that works very well for this piece and Naomi's as well.
Oh, Brenda's actually saying, I missed this comment. The non eyes represent how I felt sort of blind for so many years while taking the medication. Yeah, I do notice, Jordan, that there are certain details in the face that are de emphasized. And like Brenda's saying, those don't feel like eyes, they feel like holes to me. They don't feel like there's anything actually there. And then the absence of hair is also really interesting because I see these as bald heads. I don't know. Do you read it that way, or am I just the only one?
I saw it as shaved. I don't know about like 100% bald, but I definitely saw it as, um, the closest character I can think of is 11 from Stranger Things in season one. How her hair was just like super short. That's what I'm thinking of.
Scott is saying, I can't shake the feeling of immersion, of being submerged in the deep sea here, and an almost pressure that comes with it. Yeah, the space, I think, feels very suffocating. And I like that about this piece. But I do think, Brenda, there are things you can do with the faces to make that space even more dark and mysterious. And one artist I think you should look at, Brenda, is Antony Gormley. He's a British contemporary sculptor, and he did this piece in 2007 called Blind Light. And it's basically this like box that's full of fog that people can actually walk around and also inside of. And I think you'll see if you look up this piece and you look at all the different photographs that people have taken of it, there are similarities in that some of the figures really come forward and are very clearly articulated, but then there's some other figures that are barely there. And so I think that's the type of variation that we're talking about. And Brenda's saying these faces are supposed to be inside, like they were literally being repressed and living inside me. Wonderful. It's a really powerful piece. And I think a lot of people are responding by saying, make this into a series. This is not a one off piece. I do feel that there's a lot of potential here, and I would love to see you continue with this series. We've got an art prof share today. So I'm going to share with you guys these two digital pieces that Anaya Tapia created. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Antonia talks about in the video description, there's their statement. Really enjoyed the pacing of the lecture, which was one of my anatomy live drawing streams. And actually, Antonio referred to two of these different streams. And these have been so much fun, you guys. I did one yesterday. I had a blast. Like, I was in such a crappy mood, and I was like in such a good mood after. And so Antonia says, the way we're told to be warmed up takes several minutes, relieves the stress of drawing right from the start. I learn and relearn the importance of pacing, seeing a drawing as a 3-hour process where you warm up for 2.5 hours to do a 30-minute drawing. Really insightful. Well, what do you think about these drawings, Jordan?
I think that the two things that really strike me are the bold outline. I think there's something there that I just really appreciate as someone who likes animation and stuff like that. So that attracts my eye for one. And then the next one is probably the shading. I get the sense that that was really important to Antonio to make sure that he captured that. And so I'm really glad that seemed to work well in these two pieces.
For sure. And I feel that especially this one of the seated male figure, if you look at how simple the shading is, just that one shadow on the right leg shows you that that leg is being pulled back. And I think a lot of people are very quick to like draw every single little fragment of a shadow. And what I really like about these paintings is that Antonio really, I think, absorbed that concept that I talk about in the drawing streams about laying out a rug of tone, keeping it real simple. Because actually it is hard, I think, with anatomy to see past details and look at the essential structure. Do you think that's the case, Jordan?
Oh, all the time. I still struggle with that for every once in a while. Because everyone likes the detail. That's part of the reason why we like the art is because of all that stuff. But a lot of people don't realize not till like you're 90% done with the piece. You have to get all that structure to build on first.
Yeah, so Antonio, I think if you start doing longer pieces where you are having time to put in those details, you're going to find you got a really good foundation of basic shadows to support that. And that's fantastic. So, really nice job doing that. If you guys would like to be considered for our YouTube shout out and you've created an artwork in reaction to one of our videos, go to artprof.org, click on tutorials. On the purple button, we have the Art Prof Share submission form, and you guys can be considered for our YouTube shout out. Or if you want, just show us on Instagram. I oftentimes share a lot of the Art Prof Share pieces in the Instagram stories. Just make sure you tag us and that you use hashtag ArtProfShare. Join us in the Discord because we're going to have a little after party in the Discord after this stream. You want to join us in the channel, which is called Post Live Streams. Subscribe to our channel and join the Art Prof family. And Brenda is saying in the chat, thank you so much, everyone. Well, thank you, Brenda and Naomi, for sharing your work with us. We love talking about your pieces and what you guys are exploring. And thank you finally to our top Patreon supporters who make all of this possible. Thank you to everybody who watched live and all your thoughtful comments interpreting Naomi and Brenda's pieces. Everybody, please stay safe. We'll see you next time.